Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Omona Okonkwo, Communications Director at Dear Nigeria, and I am absolutely thrilled to be your host today for what promises to be a game-changing conversation about Nigeria's energy future. Whether you're joining us from Lagos, Abuja, Port Harcourt, or anywhere across our beautiful country, or even around the world, thank you for taking your time out of this Saturday to be a part of this crucial discussion. Now, first, I'd like to talk a little bit about Dear Nigeria, the host of this webinar. Dear Nigeria is an energy as a service company that offers a wide range of services to customers in Lagos and Abuja. Dear Nigeria provides diesel, cooking gas, solar solutions, electricity vending, and essential energy accessories to Nigerian consumers and businesses through our platform, www.dearnigeria.com. The company also offers specialized services, including converting petrol generators to run on cleaner LPG fuel and partnering with real estate developers to install gas pipeline systems in residential estates and apartment buildings in Lagos and Abuja. Now, back to the topic of the day. Today's conversation, reviving local refining capacity, roadmap to self-sufficiency, isn't just timely, it is urgent. For too long, we have watched our crude oil leave our shores, only to buy back refined products at premium prices. But that story is changing. And you are here to be part of writing the next chapter. Now, I am honored to introduce our distinguished speakers. First, we have Jide Pratt, COO of Iona and country manager at Trade Grid, a visionary leader who has been at the forefront of transforming how we think about energy trading and local capacity building. You're welcome, sir.
Good morning, Omono. Good morning, everybody listening, and thank you very much for talking with us. And I have to hail my boss, Oga Kevin. Morning, boss.
Okay, and joining us in this
Don't mind
conversation.
the praise my Oga.
Oh, okay. Yeah, well, a meeting of the Ogas. You're both welcome. And also joining us in this conversation is Kelvin Emmanuel, an accomplished economist whose insights into Nigeria's economic landscape have helped to shape policy conversations across the continent. Together, we are going to explore the real practical steps that Nigeria can take to not just revive, but revolutionize our local refining capacity. So grab your coffee, your juice, your tea, or water, and get comfortable, and let's dive into a conversation that could very well shape Nigeria's energy destiny. So to start us off, I want to begin with Mr. Kelvin. This question goes to you. So what are the most significant challenges hindering the growth of local refining capacity in Nigeria, and how can they be addressed?
I want to thank you very much. Good morning, and good morning to everyone. Special shout out to my chief, Jide Pratt, who is here. And thank you to Dare for hosting this session. The last 12 months has been very catalytic in these conversations, from the policy side to the operational side. I think the market is beginning to achieve some measure of stability. There is a clear path of direction between the government and the operators. I would like to say that before the second quarter of last year, the midstream sector in Nigeria was practically not existing. There was no midstream sector. There was just an upstream and a downstream sector. Even if the PIA specified, laws that should govern the midstream sector in Nigeria. NNPC refineries, the four of them, Old Port Harcourt, New Port Harcourt. Old Port Harcourt was 160,000 barrels, New Port Harcourt 150,000 barrels, Warri 125,000 barrels, Kaduna 110,000 barrels. They were practically moribund. So even in sections 109 on the option for refiners Nigeria to buy crude in Naira, for the 445,000 barrels that form the crude intervention stock for NNPC. I will explain as we go along what's used in, a scheme. So for me, I think that the emergence of Dangote, is just seen, and the decision of the president to allow sections 205 of PIA to remove under recovery for pricing petrol in Nigeria and provide a subsidy for the markets in Nigeria and move the market towards a market-based pricing model. Even if there's still a lot of work to be done by the regulator and MDPRA, shows that you're gradually beginning to see the emergence of the midstream sector in Nigeria. But of course, I think that emergence should dictate a change in the direction between interaction of upstream and midstream, especially as it concerns domestic crude supply obligations versus sanctity of contracts that operators upstream will always tell you about. And the OPEC strategy Nigeria has, where you want to satisfy the demands of OPEC quota versus you satisfying the demands of your domestic refiners and then exporting the difference. So I think that you're going to see a reset of the heads of the regulators for the up, down, and midstream sector in Nigeria in the coming weeks. And I think that reset is going to, herald the beginning of a change in the actual implementation of the PA, especially as it concerns the midstream and downstream sector in Nigeria. Because, before Dangote came on stream, what you had was NNPC was practically controlling 100% of the importation of products to Nigeria, because a lot of the marketers didn't have the FX to do it, and they were doing it through either their DSDP or vendor financing program. So the fact that the amount of products that are imported into Nigeria has reduced because Dangote is supplying the markets with white transportation fuels, shows that there needs to be a reset of the gazettes that are produced by NMDPRA from what the PIA says on the midstream and downstream sector in Nigeria.
Okay, thank you very much for your response. My next question goes to Mr. Jide. How do you envision the role of local refineries in Nigeria's energy mix, particularly in relation to reducing imports and enhancing energy security?
Okay, first and foremost, thank you, Omono, for talking to me. And what you do, I must say this is impactful. Combination of yourself and Kevin are massive must-haves in a country that wants to get things right. That said, to your question, every time that you try to develop an economy or develop a sector, you must have, and these are my personal beliefs, you must have an interaction between international players and local players, which is what we call local content. So that said, if you look at it, that capital, the first cardinal rule about capital is that it's going to chase investment returns. But then again, there's what they call local sense in the local palace. So you find out that the geography of an area, while best practices comes in internationally, the people who live and coexist in that locality have what you call local sense, and we go by the assumption they should apply it right. So that said, the combination of international players and local content means that local content is sat at home and looks for the best way to develop within the resources that she owns. Now, it's important we go back a bit on that. Resources that she owns. So look at it that you bring out crude oil from the ground in Nigeria. Crude oil is a commodity, and I tell people every day, you don't drive into a petrol station to buy 10 liters of crude oil. You're always going to buy what has been derived from crude oil, which is why you hear the word derivatives. That said, to refine it, if the local player is involved in the refining process, then what you find out first and foremost, we had an abnormality some time back where you took out crude from Nigeria abroad, refined it, and then brought back refined petroleum products. That's an aberration. So what part do the local players have to play? They must develop, they must enhance competence, knowledge, and then technical ability to be able to convert crude into petroleum products. And I'll say it profitably. Because once you do anything without profit, then you might as well just be an NGO. So the part the local community has to play is that understanding the local sense, taking best practices from international players, they're able to extract value, and I'll use the word equitably. Now, go back a bit to 20 years in Nigeria, we had refineries that were, and I'll use the word kamatos. So someone, again, back to the example of local sense, international businessman, but a local player. Alhaji Dangote decides that, you know what, I'm going to invest in a refinery in Nigeria. So what he has done is that he has taken that local sense of what they know in Nigeria and built the largest single train refinery in the world. He's taking that local sense. So what it is that when we say it's our own, like in Hausa, they say Mune, it's ours, it's ours. So what you're saying is that the local sense or the local content has evolved and developed into capacity. And again, equitably. Because the first advantage of local content is that you use local players. There's a lot of conversation, there are a lot of foreigners, yes, but you see in that foreigner mix, it's for knowledge transfer. So I mean, that's the part that they've played. Whether the laws of the land have guided and helped them, that's a different conversation. But I think that would be my opening remarks in answering your question.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Jide. Back to you, Mr. Kelvin. What policy and regulatory reforms would you recommend to support the development of local refining capacity in Nigeria? I'd also like you to talk a little bit about supply.
So the PIA is quite interesting. I actually believe that the regulators are not implementing the PIA. If they implement the PIA, we will not see the friction that we've seen. And the reason is because if you consider the fact that Section 3711 of the PIA talks about sulfur limits for the kind of petrol that comes into Nigeria, and you see that the regulator, NMDPRA, does not have a functional lab to test for the quality of sulfur that comes into Nigeria and ensure that it mixes up with the cap that the regulator has set. That's an anomaly. If you also look at the fact that NMDPRA uses projection to measure actual daily consumption, and I keep saying that your empirical framework for measuring what Nigerians consume daily is the basis on which sections 317, 7 to 8 is defined, which says that, look, if the domestic market has proven the capacity to be able to refine up to more than what Nigeria consumes daily, the regulator is supposed to review the import licenses that is given out. So if you don't know what Nigerians actually consume, or you deliberately refuse to state the actual number and you inflate that number, then the basis on which section 317, 7 to 8 is defined is flawed, which gives a room for you to bring in products. And I'll tell you, a lot of the products that have been brought into Nigeria are Africa spec. So, for a long time, we've heard about the old gist about Malta, so you see that about 1.5, 1.6 million metric tons, about 2 billion liters of petrol was brought into Nigeria before Dangote started stabilizing that market around the end of the third quarter of last year, beginning of fourth quarter of last year. And anywhere around 40 or 50% of that volume had questionable sulfur level and questionable octane rating. The regulator does not have a basis to check. The regulator does not have a framework to measure daily consumption, quality and quantity. Section 317, from 6, 7 to 11 is very, very critical for, the PI. Also sections 5, 205 and 206, especially as it regards transfer pricing and a framework for, pricing of petrol, even if it's a deregulated market by players in Nigeria is very important. So in my view, I think that the regulator has not, fully implemented PI. They've not even implemented 50% of PI as concerns um, um, midstream and downstream. You also look at I'll tell you what. So just take, for example, that in the last 9 months, NNPC has imported about 41% of 4.8 billion liters of white transportation fuel, or PMS, into Nigeria. According to them, that's what they claim they've imported. Because if you check the motor tanker vessel reports, you see that these volumes are indeed true. The other marketers imported about 58.7% of that 4.8 billion liters of PMS over the intervening period. The regulator gets a levy on each liter of that petrol imported. So for me, for example, the discrepancy in what they claim they import into Nigeria, what's actually consumed in Nigeria, which justifies the basis on which they say Nigeria currently consumes about 49 to 50 million liters, which was about 70 million liters like last year, if I'm not mistaken, is the fact that NMDPRA today cannot account for the 1% levy, or about 10 naira per liter, if I'm not mistaken, on that 4.8 billion liters of PMS that was imported into Nigeria. Because if it was indeed brought into Nigeria and used, you're supposed to generate 1% on 4.8 billion liters of PMS that was imported over the intervening period. And that 1% levy is supposed to go into a fund, and that 1% levy is supposed to, in my view, for example, form a basis, an infrastructure fund or basis on which the government can say we're going to begin to revive the evacuation for transportation fuels and begin to liberalize the prices and create some kind of uniformity in price, and reduce variance between regions where they are closer to refineries and the regions that are not. So I'm very strong on this, and I don't care whose act is good. I'll say it as it is. It is my view that the current leadership of the regulatory agencies for the oil and gas sector, mid and downstream, their time is up. The president needs to reset, needs to bring in people who are going to look at it from a fresh lens. Outside in is the best approach, people who understand the industry, who can look at the PIA, especially the mid and downstream, and implement the Petroleum Industry Act, the full letter of the law.
Okay, thank you very much for that insightful response. Mr. Jide, are you still with us?
Yes, I am.
Great.
Yes, I am.
How can local refineries in Nigeria compete with international players given the current market dynamics and infrastructural constraints?
I think that the easy answer to that is funding. So think about it this way. If you look at technology, if best practices, and I spoke earlier about knowledge transfer, if that is still a process that is ongoing, then competition is a bit difficult. But if you look at what capital is, and you can get access to the same cost of capital that they're getting, you have modular refineries like Walter Smith. You have what you call them, I forget their name now. There are 2 or 3 other refineries that I had at the top of my mind. And what they've been able to do.
Aradel,
thank you very much, Aradel. That was the name I wanted to talk about. So if you look at what 2 of them are doing, these are local companies, best practice, international standard. But have they been able to scale to the size of, let's say, the 3 moribund refineries? The answer is no. Bua is building a refinery, but she hasn't gotten to her end date in terms of when that refinery is going to be completed. So I will go back to what I said initially. If the capital is cheap, then you can dare to dream. We currently have these people doing very, very well at modular refinery levels. But at those modular refinery levels, what you find out the difference is that most of them will not be able to crack into petrol. So they'll have your fuel oils. They probably even be able to get to naphtha in some cases. But you'll find out that gas oil will be the bane of their operations. So if you look at that on a competing level, if you look at any refinery in Europe, they're able to go the whole hog. And I mean the whole hog in terms of, you're talking about barrels and 150,000 barrels capacity, day 250. South Korea has 2 or 3 that are super refineries. So competition at that level is a bit difficult because they are, I don't know if the word to use is limited to the size of what the modular refinery can give them. The investment to bring in a refined catalytic cracker into a refinery is a massive investment. Again, when it comes to refining, and I tell people this, it's not drilling. So you have to be super efficient to be able to make your crack spread and make some good margin. If you miss it, then you find out that you're losing money. So let's go back to the answer to your question. On their standards, they're doing well. If they have access to the same kind of capital and financing, which are low single-digit interest rates, then it makes them bear a bit more. So what you find out is that they're growing, and I was saying leaps and bounds, but they haven't gotten to where they need to get to. Maybe deals and transactions like what has happened with the Seplat deal. Maybe things like that will give some backing to more local companies for them to have a kind of integrated supply chain where they will now begin to look at investing in larger refineries other than modular refineries. At the back of that, if you permit me, just to comment on the last conversation with Kevin, you find out that in Nigeria, we misconstrue supply with consumption. So think about it, that NMDBRA today knows how many vessels berth in Nigeria. That is the supply side. In downstream, there's distribution. So you find out that those products that end from the vessels go into a storage tank. NMDBRA has those storage tank volumes. They have truck out. So you see, I still struggle with how today we're saying we do not know what the daily consumption is. And it's very, very simple. When you go to these retail outlets, every retail outlet has a dip in the morning to know what their tank is. And it's very easy to calculate what they've sold. You just go to the totalizers. The totalizer are those things that look like counters on the machines where you buy from. End of day totalizer reading, you know what your daily sale is. Operation White was set up in 2015 or 2016, and we used to feed in data into this. It still resides in NMDPRA. So, but like I say, where there's chaos, there's gain. So maybe by choice, they just decide not to be able to declare, but that's a topic for another day.
Yeah, I like the point about it being a choice, not necessarily because it's not there. Okay, so back to Mr. Kelvin. What opportunities exist for partnerships or collaborations between local refineries and international oil companies or other stakeholders?
Well, what opportunities exist for collaboration? I think it has to do mostly with sections 109 on domestic crude supply obligations, offtake agreements. Um, you know, I, if you look at the landscape for international commodity traders, I'll tell you, for example, that Dangote is wrestling away the supply for a lot of the markets in sub-Saharan Africa and South Africa. Strong interest from markets in Zambia, Zimbabwe, Botswana, Namibia, even South Africa, because South Africa is now a net importer of petroleum products. Uh, so you've seen them, the likes of Glencore, Vitol, Trafigura, that have historically been suppliers of light transportation fuels to these markets, beginning to see their share of the market slip. I don't know if you're going to see them increase their offtake of products from Nigeria to this market, but I think you're going to see in the future markets in Europe take products from Nigeria and refined products from Nigeria, because the refinery in the UK, I think it's in Scotland, if I'm not mistaken, that is owned by Petroleum, if I'm not mistaken. I didn't get that. I'll try to get the two companies that are operating a joint venture that own a refinery in Scotland that is shutting down. You're going to see them take products from Nigeria. I don't know if the fact that Dangote is wrestling the share of the market that international traders have in these countries I mentioned affects his ability to be able to do um, swap transactions for crude, in exchange for refined products, for example, or affect his ability to source for crudes from the US, for example. He has crude oil feedstock coming from America, even if NNPC has reinstated the Naira-based crude swap, but the volumes are not climbing up as fast as was expected, or, you know. So it's a complex, um, you know, situation. I'll put it that way. But I honestly think that's important for the government, and this is going to rest on the government, because when this conversation comes about Section 109, it's always on stabilization clauses, sanctity of contracts, and the fact that some IPPG members, national oil companies, borrow money, they are over leverage to be able to operate their assets. I think I was on Arise earlier today on Arise Business Week. We're talking about the transfer of JB obligations from the IOCs that are divested, Chapal, Renaissance, Seplat, transfer, especially as it regards the carry, because they've operated the carry for a very long time when NPC is unable to contribute their share of FID for capital expenditure, and the IOCs carry them, and this goes into cash call arrears. And question, for example, is if you look at the deal between Renaissance and SPDC, $2.4 billion, the fact that the cash that Renaissance was able to put up was not more than $1.2 billion. The remaining was structured to be paid over a period of time through feedstock, gas and oil. Um, if Renaissance, for example, wants to do a joint venture and a registered joint venture, and NNPC says we don't have the cash to put up, and the IOCs would typically carry them if it were them, will these national oil companies that are over leveraged be able to do that? And if they go to source money through the debt capital market, for example, through maybe pre-product exemption facility, and then they have to pay back with crude oil after a moratorium period, will they be able to meet up with DCS obligations and abide by sections 109 of the PIA? So if you're talking about collaboration in that sense, these are the factors and the complex realities you have to begin to look at. But it will come back to the government. To come back to the government, because I'm of the view, for example, that NNPC needs to, PIA has to be amended, NNPC needs to migrate from UJBs to IJBC, and look at project financing from the debt and equity capital markets to be able to put up a side and rely less on carry, so that you will not be encumbered when you have to meet up with DCS obligations and say that, standard stabilization clauses and sanctity of contracts will supply feedstock to the refiners midstream to refine, and rely less on importing products that places an additional premium when you refine to the markets in Nigeria.
Okay, thank you very much. But regarding what you said about, it goes back to the government. Do you think the government is ready to pull the trigger on that?
It's not about it being ready. It's about the options that exist and the fact that, look, if you don't do what you have to do, you're going to get smoked out, which was good that the president decided to flush out the immediate past management of NNPC, who did a very, very terrible job. I think it's the worst management NNPC has had in its history. This is my view. I don't have anything personal against them, but based on the results on the ground and things I know about the moving parts, is the worst management the NNPC has had, and the board was practically not existent. So it's Bio is between a rock and a hard place, and I don't envy him at all. Especially considering that, look, the government just announced fiscal incentives on cost savings, and I was looking at the cost savings formula for cost savings: targeted operating cost minus actual operating cost times an unlike fiscal sales for hydrocarbons. And while that might work upstream, because we look at unit cost per barrel, based on the maturity of the wells that you're producing from, as the maturity goes up from 20 to 40 to 60 to 80%, the cost climbs from anywhere around $22 to $25 and it climbs up to $59. And you consider that the open market rate for crude oil price right now is sitting anywhere around comfortably $64, $65. It's difficult for you to want to attract companies to open FID to produce crude, when your crude oil prices are at a level that is, touching what it costs you to bring crude oil to surface, So, look, in the last 2 months, NMPC has had cargoes that are laying lake-on. Lake-on means that the cargoes have been allocated for them to be lifted, but it's not been lifted. And this is because, as we speak, every breaking morning, the government pays 294,000 barrels of crude on that crude oil swap for fossil agreement structure. It was 447,000, 450,000. It's dropped because some of those FSAs have been wound up.
Yeah.
But today, they pay 294,000 barrels every breaking morning. And if you have a fossil agreement where there's a strike price, it's usually a strike price for an FSA. The strike price protects the lender, who has a collector. Says that if we set it at $55 or $60, if crude oil price drops below the strike price, you either have to do two things. You either have to go to your debt service reserve account and put up difference, or you give us more barrels to cover for the difference. There was, in the history of fossil agreements in Nigeria, since MLA started structuring FSAs in 2019, honestly, there's only been one fossil agreement of all of them that is structured that had a debt service reserve account to act as a buffer in case price drops. They didn't envision that a day will come when we'll be struggling to get crude oil back to $70, and Donald Trump will be insisting that we're going to keep crude oil prices low because gas prices has to be low in America to score cheap political points. So when I say Bayo is between a rock and a hard place, what I mean is that he doesn't have control over the price of crude, but he somehow has to deal with operators having high costs of production because of technical losses, because of the terrain, because of issues around delaying of cash calls, and the fact that when they do their fiscal modeling from the petroleum fiscal regime, they factor in all of those interest for delays into the unit cost of production. And at the same time, he has to ensure that the obligations are met at prices that are lower than the open market rate. So it's not an easy job. I wish him well, but we're going to see friction, and you're not going to see stability in the markets. The rolling debt plan in medium-term expenditure framework for the next 3 years, we say the government wants to borrow about $21 billion, an average of $7 billion per year. It just shows you that the government is trying to hedge to raise money to finance deficits, even if I think when the tax bills is signed and when it kicks in 3 to 6 months, you're going to see improved revenue to debt, revenue to GDP ratio, tax and non-tax revenue to GDP ratio, and see the deficit financing reducing the budget. But it's not going to be a smooth ride.
Yeah. Obviously. Thank you very much, Mr. Kelvin. Okay, Mr. Jide, how can Nigeria's local refining capacity be optimized to meet domestic demand while also exploring export opportunities?
Thanks, Omono. See, when we started this conversation, we talked about doing things a bit more efficiently. As you go further downstream, you find out that once you can reduce your overhead or your cost of operations, it impacts your bottom line. So it means that local refineries have gotten into a place where decisions can no longer be made based on emotions, or let me use the word political inclinations. So if X barrel comes out, let's assume that your capacity as a modular refinery is 10,000. It means that in your crack spread, you must find what you think the best optimally efficient product line is, and then strike that balance quietly. Look at fuel oils now. Most of the fuel oils that come out of modular refinery, we no longer use locally. But there's a need across West Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa. So those are export proceeds on that side. A few modular refineries are trying to now get to jet fuel. If you look at the West African coast, what you'll find out is that two things. A lot of people ask the question, why is Nigeria's pricing of petroleum products? Why does it seem, and the word I'll use is cheaper? So going back into the freight, Nigeria has two single point more on it. The Pinnacle can take a 60,000 metric ton vessel based on that draft. If you went to what used to be called the OVH jetty, which is now NNPC jetty in Apapa, that can take in 35,000 to 40,000 metric ton capacity vessels. So what am I trying to say? In those scenarios that I've just painted, they're able to enhance and enjoy a freight efficiency and optimization. So go to the local refineries. If you strike that balance as a modular refinery and you're able to refine the product where your crack spread is the highest, then what it means is that your mode of operations, a refinery like the one in Imo, you find out that she's landlocked. So what it is that in terms of efficiency, she's losing efficiency because every time the product fuel oil comes out, she has to truck her fuel oil to Port Harcourt to be able to export it. So what you gain in terms of refining crack, you seem to lose some of it along the value chain in terms of moving it to Port Harcourt. You now backload it in Port Harcourt onto a vessel and lose some volume again because obviously it's fuel oil, it's going to congeal as temperature reduces. So you're losing on two parts. So in terms of efficiencies, they're losing money. So you must be able to find ways where the modular refineries have an integrated supply model. The cost of a pipeline is going to be restrictive. But if you get patient capital, single-digit capital, then what it means is that they're able to move from pipeline to coast, direct loading, and earn foreign exchange on the export side. Sadly, with jet, it's a bit more complex. With jet fuel, the handling is extremely important. Contamination with jet fuel is the worst thing that can happen to any human being. You don't want to be at 30,000 feet above sea level and then your jet fuel freezes. Traceability with jet as well. So if you go for the high margin products in terms of their crack, reduce their supply chain inefficiency, then what you'll find out is that they're a bit more efficient. I also think a lot of collaborations need to happen. There's some approvals for modular refineries, a bit more, and you find out within a second circumference, there are about 3. And I'm wondering, couldn't there be better collaboration between those 3 parties to put together funding and get something a bit more sizable? Access to jet is only available in 1 out of those 3 in those regions. And I'm wondering, they must drive efficiencies in ways where the supply chain is not convoluted. It has to be as easy as possible. On the local part, they're simply going to find out that they're going to feed the region that they coexist in. So if you look at something that is somewhere within the Delta region, for instance, then you find out that that gas oil supply can feed as much as there's no gas. Why did I say that? If you went to somewhere like an Agbara today and tried to sell diesel, you probably are not going to make any money. Because what you find out is that Axela has been able to pipe all that route all the way to Shagamu. So people are feeding off gas, which is a cheaper alternative, or let me say cleaner alternative. So I think that what has to happen, supply chains need to be optimized, and crack spread in terms of what they decide to crack as a modular refinery to be able to give them the best margins are the 2 things they need to drive. I think that's really what it is. That's really what it is. Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Jide. At this point, if you're just joining us, welcome. We have a recording for you in case you missed the first part of this webinar. Don't worry, we'll share the recording so you catch up with everything that has been said so far. Please, if you have any questions for our speakers, please drop your questions in the chat box, and I will try my best to get back to you and make sure that your questions are answered. And now, Mr. Kelvin, what are the key factors driving investment in local refining capacity, and how can investors be attracted to this sector?
The barrier to entry is very high. So even for BOA that wants to build a refinery in Akwa Ibom, I was just saying to someone, I said, where is he going to land the equipment to? So this is the reason why I've been advocating for centralization of maritime operations in the Eastern Corridor. Because even if you land this in on air, you have to truck it. And if, for a commercial refinery, some of those equipments are huge. You know, you have to get special, you know, conveyors, special trucks, with tires that are more than the normal trucks I am, you know, to be able to move some of those equipment. So it's always best to have, you know, seaports close to where you're building a refinery. You know, um, I don't think you're going to see. Nigeria is definitely in the next 5-7 years going to become a major net exporter of refined petroleum products to the world. Nigeria is going to take a lot of the markets in South Africa, East Africa. You know, Uganda wants to build a 60,000 barrel refinery this year. They're going to achieve first oil. They're producing about 210,000 barrels. So they keep about 60,000 barrels and then export about 150,000 barrels straight pipeline that Total and Sinop are building, because Uganda is landlocked. So you take it to a port in Tanzania to export out, to wherever they're going to export it to. So, with the exception of Uganda, I don't know how long Mahama would take for him to be able to structure, put the books together to what the modality would be and where they will get the feedstock from, because Ghana says they want to build a refinery and petrochemical plant also in Taba region. But Nigeria is going to be a major net exporter to most of the markets, around West African coasts, East Africa, Central Africa, South Africa. I don't see them cracking the North African markets, because you have Libya, you have Algeria, in those regions. But if you see more refineries, commercial refineries in Nigeria, definitely probably see BOA 200,000 barrels per day, taking at least 6 to 7 years to get it off the ground to achieve actual production. Yeah. In terms of modular refineries, like Jide said earlier, the likes of HSI is coming in Abia State, Owaza, 11,000 barrels, if I'm not mistaken. They have a license established. I think by the third quarter of this year, they're going to get a license to build from NMPRA. They're trying to raise $71 million. 50 million of that is coming from debt capital markets, and $21 million is equity financing. We have Aradel that has 11,000 barrels installed capacity. Aradel was planning to install a catalytic reforming unit to be able to crack naphtha into PMS, but I don't know how they're going with that. I don't know if it makes sense, because Jide talked about crack spread and explained it in details. If they'll be able to achieve positive cracking margins because of the size and the fact that they don't have scale, because positive cracking margins also comes with scale. You have the pond midstream. I don't think the pond midstream is currently operational. The pond midstream is about 2,500 barrels per day. You have Walter Smith in Imo State, and Jide explained the fact that Walter Smith is landlocked. So if you're even going to export, you have to take it on there. And that costs of haulage, is also a factor. Because if you have a refinery, we want to have a single point mooring, to be able to take products off from your throughput, so that you don't have additional costs and you'll be able to compete. So these are the realities you currently have on ground. And if you see another commercial size refinery in Nigeria, I don't think it's going to be more than one more commercial size refinery. But I predict that within the next 5 to 7 years, Nigeria is going to stabilize and is going to become a major market for supplying of refined petroleum and petrochemicals around most of the countries in Africa, East, Central, South Africa, and some markets in Asia, some markets in Europe, because Europe is decarbonizing. More refineries that are old and have reached their shelf life are going to wind off because of their decarbonization exercise, and because of the fact that the economies of scale doesn't favor them due to the age of those refineries, and come to source products from Nigeria.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, sir. Back to you, Mr. Jide. Now we have to talk about this. How can local refineries in Nigeria ensure sustainability and environmental compliance while pursuing self-sufficiency?
Well, it's an interesting question, and I think I'll take this from a regulatory answer. So we're talking about sustainability. And when you look at it from when an EIA, environmental impact assessment, is done, we found out that time after time, on several briefs I've heard, we seem to sweep sustainability and regulatory compliance under the carpet. But this is the point. If you sweep it under the carpet, it's because the person who should demand it is willing and able to sweep it under the carpet. So they're between a rock and a hard place. We're not making money. Then you're telling us that even to make money, we need to be able to do things in a sustainable manner. Where will we get the extra investment? But the truth of the matter is this: you're a local company, and if you're going to scale, then what it means is that the first cardinal rule is that you don't want issues on top, like things like a spillage. Because you see, when things like this that are not done with regulatory compliance, are not done with sustainability at the end in mind, as the end in mind, then what you find out is that it's a recipe for disaster. So they're going to have to find ways where they're big on governance issues. From the regulator side, penalties need to become very, very prohibitive. Something as simple as gas flaring for a major refinery, for other refineries in the Delta, where you find out that gas flaring is an option and would rather flare gas and pay a fine than not flare it. While we talk about sustainability, let's also be clear that the road to sustainability for us in Nigeria is a longer road ahead. While Europe is saying that, look, we're de-emphasizing fossil fuel, Africa is saying, look, let's emphasize gas as a transition fuel. Because you don't jettison your resources at the expense of a sustainability goal. But you cannot cancel a sustainability or governance environmental goal at the expense of a spillage that is how will I put it, more damage. The calamity is more. So I think that what they need to do is find a way where they're going to do these things in phases, begin to tick the boxes on compliance issues and take it a bit more seriously. But I'm not so sure the greatest issues from the local companies and the local players. I think to a large extent, the greatest problem is still from who regulates them. So if I'm willing to turn a blind eye as a regulator for a pecuniary gain, then what it means is that we're going to keep on shifting the goalposts. And we're going to keep on shifting it till there's a calamity. So things as simple as easy as fire briefs, safety documentation. I go around some complexes and I wonder that if I was the head honcho here, I'm not so sure these people would be in business. I think we're not deliberate enough about things concerning sustainability and regulatory compliance. It's missing. But again, I'm not so sure I'll put it at the ballpark of the person who is the local company. In my opinion, more still needs to come from the regulator in terms of how they sanction these things and how serious they are. But for the companies, they must strike a balance and begin to take those checklists and find ways where they're looking for cleaner ways of refining, cleaner ways of collecting. So you find a lot of people are injecting gas, for instance, back into their operations. They're now using it as power. Waste collection, how do you recycle? How do you cleanly dispose this waste? I mean, there's so many things that they can do. And I just think that right now, the first step is for them to be a bit more, and I'll use the word deliberate in terms of their checklists around compliance, and for the regulator also to step up in terms of sanctions that are prohibitive.
Okay, thank you very much. We just have a few minutes, but we still have some questions. Mr. Kelvin, what role do you see technology playing in enhancing the efficiency and competitiveness of local refineries in Nigeria?
That's an interesting question. Efficiency and competitiveness. Problem is not efficiency and competitiveness, because the reality is that the government-owned refineries are not working. That's the reality. Let's tell ourselves the truth. They're not working. Port Harcourt is not refining. When they claimed they started last year, I said that Trunkline and Bonny River Terminal that should supply Port Harcourt LMA Phase 5 with feedstock was not in service. And when they said Warri started in December last year, I said that for 6-kilometer pipeline that should take crude feedstock from Escravos to Warri was not in service. The 674-kilometer pipeline that should take crude oil feedstock from Escravos to Kaduna is not in service. So are you going to take feedstock? Are you going to truck it, or are you going to batch it? How is it going to go? You know. So when you say technology to help efficiency for local refineries in Nigeria, I don't know if you mean modular refineries that are doing gas oils like GDI has talked about. He's explained it. Because they are not producing PMS, they don't have hot catalytic reforming units to be able to reform naphtha, which is a base compound for producing distillates like PMS and the likes. You know, when you're referring to the government-owned refineries that are not operational, or you're talking about Dangote that has been able to achieve a positive working margin and is currently doing 44 million of PMS. I don't know who you're referring to. You know, so that question is vague and is broad. I don't think it addresses the realities on the ground. As difficult as this may sound, and so I know some people don't like to hear the word monopoly. I don't. This is the reality on the ground. The only person who is commercially refining crude oil into PMS, white transportation fuels, and it's now produced using some of the propane that it generates because of the density and viscosity of the crude that you have, to do petrochemical feedstock like polyethylene crystals. It's Dangote. That's it. It's a new refinery, so the efficiency is very high. Like I said, I think the government, NNPC, should let go of those government-owned refineries that are not working, and double down on Dangote. I think that the government should encourage BUA to start EPC for this refinery in Akwa Ibom, and also support him with the seaport, to be able to build a refinery there so that he can commercially compete with Dangote. That's what I think we should do. I think we should give, the private sector, give them space to do business and focus, and the government focus on regulation. NNPC will never be able to come to the point where they're able to revive those dead refineries. There's no amount of technology, because those assets are old, they're moribund. And simply, I was speaking to someone today. I said, he asked me a question, and I said, listen, if Biojulari, when he was at SNEPCO or when he was in Shell, could not advise Shell to take over the operation and maintenance of the Port Harcourt refinery, considering that Shell had been building it. Why does he think that now that he's crossed from Shell to NNPC, he can advise the president to keep those government-owned refineries I could not advise Shell to operate and maintain when he was at Shell? Does it make sense?
Yeah. Okay. Very interesting take there. We actually have a question from two questions actually from Benjamin Akumaka. He's asking how best can the downstream regulator create proper framework that ensures compliance of refined products coming into Nigeria? And I think Mr. Jide has answered that first question, if I'm correct. Mr. Jide, you have answered that first question in
Yes,
the
I've typed it
comment
back to
section,
Benjamin. Yes, I
the
have.
chat box. Yes.
Right.
And now the last thing you said, Kelvin, talking about how the refineries should be left to the private sector. That's actually Benjamin's second question. He said, what are your thoughts on local players acquiring fully or partially the NNPCL's PH and Warri refineries? I don't know if you have more commentary on that.
I wish them good luck
But
because the the Port Harcourt refinery, what it was doing basically was that it was, refining crude oil into naphtha and then blending with C5 resins, and it could only do about 18% yield. Dangote is doing about 57% yield. You know, I wish anyone who is going to take those debt assets good luck. I don't think anyone in his sane mind is going to pay $100 million, to take those assets, from NNPC. It's a dead horse. There's no amount of beating a dead horse that will bring it back. We just don't like the truth. We like, Nigeria believes that part of the pride of a nation is to keep dead moribund assets that are not yielding anything. Ajaokuta is an example. Government-owned refineries are a second example. It's not working. Let us accept that it's not working. Let it go. It's a drain pipe. If you look at the balance sheet of NNPC, this June, I'm expecting them to release the annual financial statement for 2024. You will see the hole on the balance sheet on what those assets are costing the group. It's not working. Let it go. So if you're borrowing money to fund budget and you have a chance to save crude oil that should go into profit oil to remit to the consolidated revenue fund to fund budget and reduce deficit financing, and you choose to want to maintain your pride by pumping more money into those debt assets because you want to maintain your pride that you have state-owned enterprise, you have refineries that are working, well, good luck with that, but it's not working.
Okay, Mr. Jide, your commentary on this, please.
Look, I've said this and I agree 100% with Kevin. I've said this at so many forums that when something reaches its best to buy date, you toss it. The best time for us to have sold those refineries was when the late President Yaradua was in power. That was the best chance we had of getting those things off the books of Nigeria. It will not make sense. So unless someone, and they say insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. Unless someone is insane, they will cough out $100 million. And I believe the only person that can do that at this moment, sad to hear it, might be the government through a syndicated loan through someone. But other than that, it's time to pack it up. And again, support a bois. That's just what it is. Those refineries are not going to yield 60, 70%. It's not going to happen. It's not the proponent of doom statement, but it's time to just offload them. Let them go. Whoever wants to take it as scrap, so be it. But it's time to move on.
Wow. Thank you very much. So I'd like both of you to give your closing statements with this question, answer to this question rather. What short-term and long-term strategies would you propose for achieving self-sufficiency in local refining capacity? Mr. Kelvin first, please.
It's been a pleasure being with Jide. It's always a pleasure. He knows his stuff. Very humble gentleman. I think we've talked about it, but I will tell you on one note that for now, in my view, I don't think Nigeria consumes more than 30 million liters of PMS per day because there's been demand destruction. I think that number is even around 28 million. I think as it exists, we're already self-sufficient. We just don't want to accept because we don't have an empirical framework for measuring actual daily consumption, But of course, I know it's a hot political issue because some people feel, oh, Dangote should not be the only one supplying the market. The reality is that he's producing more PMS today than Nigeria actually consumes. That's the reality. It will take you having a new leadership that will provide transparency to sections 317, 7 to 8 for us to unravel the truth. But it will come. Thank you.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you,
Over to
Amon.
you, Mr. G.
Thank
Yeah.
you, Kevin, as always. Always a pleasure to hear you speak. There's only one major thing I think Kevin and myself can never agree on, and this that monopoly thing. I've always been of the view that when you deregulate a market, you must find, and I think it is a percentage. There's nobody in Nigeria or West Africa that can give us the quality of what the Dangote refinery gives us. That's a fact. But I think that the Dangote refinery at any given time should not do more than 70% max of that total need. And you see, for me, that's why it's called a balance. There must be an alternative. And one of the major reasons I always say is that the Dangote refinery is a single train refinery. We must never forget that. God forbid there's anything that happens at Ekwe, this country is finished in terms of supplies. The second thing is that when we talk about what should we do in the medium term, and Kevin said something about Mr. Bayo Julari, he's between a rock and a hard place. But you see, when you have knowledge on your hand, and I will use the word knowledge and competence, that board has a bit of knowledge and competence. They must be able to tell the president the hard truth, and the president is not ready to listen. They must walk away. A lot of the dead assets that sit in NNPC need to go. NNPC needs to focus on gas. NNPC needs to focus on how we're going to increase production to 2.2 million barrels a day. And you see, they need to focus on those two things because a lot of what we do in a country as Nigeria rests on those things. I don't see why NNPC is chasing downstream play in 2025. Refining, they're never going to work. In the medium term, that is what they need to focus on. Once they focus on that, then you find out that they become a beautiful bride and they're able to raise capital for the assets that are viable. Bring in that there's too many holes in NNPC. We can't continue to run this country based on whether you're a party member. Those things don't matter when it comes to capital. If 10 naira comes into Nigeria, what the people who bring it in want to see is that they can exit with 12 naira on a commercially viable, sustainable way. And they can look at it and say, if I do A, B, and C, this is what, enough of clapping for ourselves for doing absolutely nothing. We need to change this paradigm. If we don't change it today, I'm not so sure there'll be a Nigeria for our kids to run. Thank you again, Omono.
Thank you so much, Mr. Jide and Mr. Kelvin, for joining us today on this very insightful topic. I'm sure our attendees have gained a lot. Thank you for sharing your insights. And please do well to follow Dear Nigeria on all social media platforms. The name doesn't change. It's Dear Nigeria everywhere. Okay. Oh, so sorry. I think somebody has her hand raised. Joy, please unmute yourself and make your commentary. Hello, Joy. Did you have your hand raised? You want to say something? Oh, okay. I guess it was a glitch or something. Okay, thank you, everyone. And we hope to see you in our next webinar. We're going to be doing this every month. So see you in June, last Saturday of June. I will definitely put out the details later. Enjoy your Saturday and have a great weekend.
Did they have a lovely weekend?
You too, bro. You too. Thank you, everybody. Thanks,
Okay.
Omono. Thanks,
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.